Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that, at first glance, looks deceptively simple. A stick and a seashell. That's right, you're about to slip into the worn shoes of a medieval pilgrim. And you'll quickly discover why these two ordinary objects mattered so much that entire legends sprouted around them. You're standing on the edge of a dusty road, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke from a nearby village. You've left behind the warmth of a hearth for weeks, maybe months of walking. The path ahead is uneven, rutted, and littered with stones sharp enough to bite into bare soles. And here's your first harsh reality check. You probably won't survive this if you go empty-handed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I always love seeing the little map that builds in my head from your answers. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first steps. The ground underfoot is rougher than it looked when you were still inside the village. Your toes curl against stones, and a chill rises through the damp earth. Every pebble reminds you that feet aren't designed to withstand hundreds of miles of punishment without help. Sandals and shoes exist, sure, but leather wears down fast when you're walking from England to Spain. And so, you look around, almost envious of others. The pilgrims who stride ahead with staffs tapping rhythmically against the dirt, and the shells that swing from their cloaks, catching sunlight like badges of honor. But not yet. Right now you're unequipped. You're just you, your cloak, maybe a satchel with bread that will go stale in 2 days. The rest? That has to be earned. The medieval world isn't a safe one, and roads are only semi-roads, more suggestion than reality. Ditches overflow after rain, bridges collapse, and sometimes your only way across a river is to roll up your tunic and wade in, praying you don't meet leeches. Historians still argue whether the average peasant would ever have risked such long pilgrimages at all, or whether most of the people trudging along these tracks were a mix of middle-class town dwellers and professional repeat pilgrims who knew all the tricks. Either way, you've joined the crowd, and you're suddenly aware that without the little markers, shells and staffs, you look more like a runaway or a vagabond than a holy traveler. A mainstream historical fact. Pilgrimage wasn't just some quirky medieval fad. By the year 1200, traveling to shrines had become one of the most popular religious practices in Europe. Millions of people, yes, millions, walked to places like Canterbury, Rome, Cologne, and most famously Santiago de Compostela in Spain. And along those roads, they became instantly recognizable by their gear. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some pilgrims swore that walking barefoot the entire way earned extra spiritual brownie points. The idea was that suffering more brought more forgiveness. It sounds noble until you actually try it and realize you've turned your soles into ground meat before reaching the first inn. Which is why, barefoot or not, a sturdy stick and a symbolic shell soon became part of your survival kit. As you walk in this opening stretch, you can almost hear the staff calling out to you from the future, whispering promises of balance and defense. And the shell, it isn't just a pretty trinket. Later, it will become your spoon, your cup, your passport, and your badge of identity. But right now, it's only a distant idea, dangling on another pilgrim's cloak, taunting you like someone flaunting their vacation selfies before you've even booked your trip. And here comes your first light joke. Imagine trying to convince your modern hiking buddies that your best water bottle is a seashell and your top trekking pole is literally a stick. REI would throw you out of the store. Still, as primitive as they seem, these objects define your role. Without them, you're just a wanderer. With them, you're a pilgrim, a person on a mission, however clumsy, however blistered. The road stretches ahead, winding through fields and patches of forest. A few dogs bark in the distance, guarding farmsteads. The sun dips lower, casting golden stripes across the mud, and you realize, this isn't just about reaching a shrine. It's about transforming yourself along the way. Each ache in your feet, and each glance at someone else's scallop shell makes you ache a little more to earn your own. By nightfall, when you finally stop under an oak tree and chew on your last crust of bread, you lie awake on damp ground. Your ears catch the murmured prayers of fellow pilgrims nearby. Their staves lie beside them like loyal watchdogs. Shells gleam faintly in the firelight. And you curl tighter in your cloak, vowing that tomorrow, somehow, you'll find the objects that turn you from a lonely traveler into a marked pilgrim. Because out here, shells and staves aren't fashion, they're survival. Morning comes far too soon, and the first thing you hear is the rhythmic thump of wood against earth. Other pilgrims are already up, walking sticks in hand, their staffs tapping like metronomes of faith. You rise groggy, still sore from sleeping on bare ground, and notice how instantly recognizable they are. Even without a word, you can tell who's here for pilgrimage and who's just passing through. It's in the way they carry those smooth, polished sticks and the way scallop shells dangle from cloaks like little medals of survival. You, on the other hand, look like a medieval nobody, a wanderer, perhaps even suspicious. The guards at city gates will eye you differently if you can't prove you're on a holy mission. That's the power of symbols. They're shortcuts to trust. When villagers see the shell, they're more likely to give bread. When innkeepers see the staff, they know you belong to the moving nation of pilgrims. Without them, you're just another mouth to feed. One mainstream fact: pilgrim gatherings often became small communities on the road, and the gear created instant bonds. A stranger with the same staff and shell kit wasn't a stranger for long. They were part of your spiritual team, whether or not you spoke the same language. You walk a few paces behind a group from Normandy. Their shells glint white against dark cloaks, and you realize the scallop isn't just decoration, it's a calling card. Some historians still argue whether shells were strictly earned only at Santiago de Compostela, or if they were picked up, sold, and swapped in dozens of towns along the way. But to the eye, a shell was proof of intent, even if not proof of arrival. And here's your quirky tidbit: not all shells were real. Some were made of tin, lead, or even pewter, cheap souvenirs shaped into scallop patterns for pilgrims who couldn't get near the sea. Imagine being allergic to seafood and still ending up with a scallop badge pinned to your chest. Medieval irony at its finest. As you study the group ahead, your attention drifts to the staff. Each pilgrim's stick is roughly the same height as its owner, sometimes taller. Some are topped with iron caps to prevent splintering, others carved with little crosses. One even has a hollow top that jingles faintly with coins sealed inside. Clever, since bandits wouldn't think to search the walking stick itself. You feel that familiar twinge of envy again. These tools aren't just symbolic, they're practical. With the staff, steps land lighter, balance steadier. With the shell, you can scoop water without dunking your whole face in a stream. Together, they turn an exhausting march into something slightly more manageable. Here's a light joke to break the tension. You realize these medieval pilgrims basically invented the first multi-tool. One stick that works as walking aid, weapon, and bank, plus a shell that doubles as cup, bowl, and bragging rights. Forget Swiss Army knives. Scallops and staves were the original package deal. The more you observe, the more you notice small rituals tied to the gear. A man from Flanders leans on his staff while whispering morning prayers, almost as if the stick were his portable altar. Another kisses her scallop shell before setting off, as though that fragile piece of the sea could shield her from wolves. You chuckle softly, superstitious maybe, but then again, wolves are no joke. And yet, you also see the quiet dignity in it. These objects are more than wood and shell, they're portable stories. Each nick in the staff tells of a fall avoided. Each crack in a shell whispers of a hard road survived. Together, they're like a resume of the journey, one that strangers can read without a word exchanged. You press forward, your bare hands itching for the comfort of a staff. For now, you keep your eyes on the ground, noting how the footprints of hundreds of pilgrims have worn the path smoother than the surrounding wild earth. Your own prints join the river of impressions. By midday, you're trailing the group close enough to hear their chatter. Half prayers, half gossip about a shrine farther ahead where you might find a priest blessing new staves. That's all the motivation you need. Because without that shell and that stick, You're still a guest in someone else's story. And you want to be part of the picture, not just the background. So you quicken your pace, hoping that by sunset, you'll finally hold the objects that mark you not as a vagrant, but as a true pilgrim. By the third morning on the road, you've learned something important. Walking without a staff feels like trying to balance on a tightrope while juggling your breakfast. Every uneven rut threatens to twist your ankle. Every patch of mud threatens to swallow your shoe whole. The countryside might look peaceful from afar, but up close, it's full of hazards that remind you why almost every experienced pilgrim carries that long, polished stick. The road itself isn't really a road in the modern sense. It's more of a scar across the land. Carts dig grooves into soft earth. Rain deepens them into miniature rivers, and herds of livestock leave dung scattered like an obstacle course. And danger isn't only in what you step on. In the woods, shadows hide things you'd rather not meet. Wolves still roam parts of Europe, their howls rolling through the night like eerie background music. And if the wolves don't get you, the bandits might. One mainstream historical fact: medieval Europe was notorious for bad neighbors. Gangs of robbers who knew pilgrimage roads offered steady streams of tired, poorly armed travelers. Records survive of kings and bishops ordering the clearing of forests to make roads safer, but it didn't solve the problem completely. Pilgrims became prime targets. You hear it firsthand when you catch up to two men from Burgundy. They talk about a companion robbed 2 nights ago, stripped of cloak and shoes, left half dead in a ditch. It's a chilling reminder that faith doesn't scare away greed. You nod silently, suddenly aware of how vulnerable you look without even a stick to swing. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some towns actually posted warnings about dangerous stretches of road, almost like medieval travel advisories. Imagine walking past a wooden sign scrawled with something like "Beware of thieves 2 miles ahead." Not exactly comforting bedtime reading. Historians still argue whether pilgrims usually traveled in large groups for safety, or whether the sheer number of solitary travelers proved the risk wasn't always so high. Either way, the danger was real enough that the staff wasn't optional. It was your insurance policy. You notice how the group ahead automatically shift their staves into defensive grips when they pass under a dense thicket. The sticks aren't waved around like swords, but their presence alone might make a lurking thief think twice. It's a bit like carrying an umbrella in the city, not always necessary, but when it rains, you're glad it's there. Of course, the staff also helps with the less dramatic dangers. Streams you need to cross, slopes you need to climb, even stray dogs who decide you look like a chew toy. Every pilgrim you meet has a story of the stick saving them, even in small ways. Light joke moment. You watch a man use his staff to knock apples off a tree and think, well, that's one way to avoid paying orchard prices. By evening, when you stumble into a wayside clearing, you feel naked without one. Other pilgrims lean on their staffs, as if resting against old friends. Their scallop shells glint in the firelight like badges of survival. You wrap your cloak tighter, trying not to look too obvious as you eye their gear. One older woman catches your glance and offers a wry smile, tapping her staff against the ground. "Don't worry," she says, "the road will provide." It's cryptic, but strangely comforting. As darkness falls, you hear the wolves again, distant, but closer than last night. Every howl makes your heart beat faster. You press your back against a tree, wishing with all your soul that you had a staff beside you. Because out here, danger is constant, and protection is something you carry in your own 2 hands. Morning mist clings to the grass, and your bones creak as you rise from the damp earth. The road stretches ahead, winding like a scar across rolling fields, and you know today will test your balance as much as your stamina. The staff, oh, the glorious staff, you still don't have it. But as you watch a fellow pilgrim plant his stick firmly into the ground, using it to vault across a puddle that would have swallowed your sandal, you finally understand its first and most obvious role. It's a walking aid, plain and simple. You trudge forward, carefully avoiding the deep grooves where wagon wheels have carved permanent scars in the soil. Each time you slip, you mutter under your breath, wishing for a sturdy pole to steady you. One mainstream fact: The classic pilgrim staff, often called a baculus, was almost always as tall as its user or taller. Medieval guides advised that it should reach the shoulder or chin, not only to give leverage uphill, but also to act as a counterweight downhill. It was essentially medieval hiking science. You glance at a younger pilgrim nearby. He climbs a muddy slope with ease, staff digging in with each step like a third leg. You meanwhile scramble, your hands clawing at loose dirt. He reaches the top, turns back, and offers you a sympathetic grin. He doesn't need to say anything. The smug rhythm of his staff against the earth says it all. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some pilgrims decorated their staffs with little bells. The jingling supposedly kept wild animals away, or, less nobly, announced their arrival in villages so people had time to hide their chickens before the hungry travelers arrived. Imagine walking with a medieval cowbell strapped to your stick, advertising your presence like an ice cream truck. Historians still argue whether these bells were primarily practical or symbolic. Some believe they scared off wolves. Others think they were a spiritual reminder, echoing the bells used in churches to call people to prayer. Either way, the sound turned a simple piece of wood into a mobile soundtrack. As you slog through another stretch of uneven ground, you can almost hear the difference a staff would make. The rhythm of step, plant, push turns a weary march into something almost graceful. You watch others use their staves to test the depth of puddles before stepping in, sparing their boots from an unpleasant plunge. One older man even uses his as a makeshift laundry pole, draping his damp tunic across it while he walks. Light joke break. You imagine modern hikers looking at that and thinking, great medieval portable clothes rack, coming soon to an overpriced outdoor gear store near you. By midday, the sun beats down, and you're sweating through your tunic. Pilgrims around you lean on their staffs like built-in benches, resting their arms on the sturdy poles without needing to sit. You flop onto the grass instead, panting like a dog. Every glance at their sticks digs the envy a little deeper. But you also notice the intimacy. These aren't disposable tools, they're companions. A pilgrim rubs his staff with oil to keep it smooth. Another ties a strip of cloth around it like a charm. The staff carries not just weight, but also meaning, almost like a pet that never complains. As the day winds down, you finally understand why no serious pilgrim leaves without one. It's not only about danger, it's about endurance. The road doesn't get smoother, your body doesn't magically grow stronger, but the staff turns a brutal march into something survivable. You curl up that night with sore legs and aching shoulders, staring at the stars. Somewhere nearby, you hear the steady thunk of someone driving their staff into the ground, setting it upright as they rest beside it. The sound feels like reassurance, like a heartbeat you wish you shared. And tomorrow, you tell yourself, you'll find one of your own. Because a true pilgrim doesn't walk the long road alone. They walk with the steady rhythm of a staff in hand. The next morning, you finally give in to temptation. A fallen branch lies across the road, roughly your height, stripped bare of leaves by the wind. It isn't polished, it isn't carved, but it's sturdy. You test it against the ground, and the weight shifts beautifully. Suddenly, you're walking differently, less like a stumbling wanderer, more like someone with purpose. Every time the branch thunks into the dirt, you feel steadier, more official. But as soon as you've found balance, a darker thought creeps in. The staff isn't just for walking, it's for fighting. And you realize this when the road narrows into a tree-lined tunnel, and two ragged men appear ahead. They lean against a tree, pretending to look casual, but you can feel their eyes scanning your satchel. Bandits. One mainstream historical fact. Records from the 12th and 13th centuries describe bands of highway robbers haunting pilgrimage roads. They'd wait near forests, bridges, or fords, anywhere a traveler couldn't avoid passing. Pilgrims became easy prey because most carried at least a few coins to pay for lodging or offerings. You grip your makeshift staff tighter, heart pounding. The men don't approach, but their grins tell you they could if they wanted. You keep walking, your stick tapping with exaggerated confidence, as though daring them to try. One of them mutters something in a dialect you don't fully catch. But maybe it's the sight of the branch in your hand, Maybe it's the group of pilgrims catching up behind you, but they let you pass. That's when it clicks. This isn't just a walking stick, it's a weapon in disguise. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some medieval guides even recommended fitting iron tips onto the staff, partly to keep it from splintering, but also because a sharpened iron cap could jab like a spear. Think of it as medieval dual-purpose engineering. Historians still argue whether pilgrims were officially encouraged to use their staffs as weapons. The church preached peace and humility, yet countless accounts describe pilgrims defending themselves. Perhaps the contradiction was conveniently overlooked. After all, a dead pilgrim doesn't complete the journey, and that doesn't look great on the spiritual resume. Later that day, you actually see a staff used in anger. A shepherd's dog rushes at the road, snapping at pilgrims' ankles. Before anyone can panic, one man whirls his staff with surprising speed, smacking the animal on the muzzle. The dog yelps, stumbles back, and slinks away. No one cheers, but everyone looks relieved. It's proof again. Survival often depends on the stick. Light joke break. You imagine a medieval advertisement. Pilgrim staff. Walks with you, prays with you, bonks wolves on the nose. Honestly, it would outsell most modern camping gear. That night at the fire, pilgrims swap stories of staff-turned-weapon. One man claims his stave once scared away 3 bandits. Another swears he killed a snake in a single blow. You're skeptical of the numbers, but not of the principle. In this world, without law on every road, a piece of wood is the difference between feeling like prey and feeling like you might actually get through. You rest your branch against your shoulder and feel a surge of pride. It's not polished, not blessed, not decorated, but it's yours. For the first time, you lie down with a little less fear. Because now, if the shadows move wrong or the wolves howl too close, you have something to swing. And that changes everything. By dawn, the stick no longer feels like a branch you picked off the road. It feels like an extension of your arm. Each time you lean into it, you sense the weight of something bigger than yourself, a thread tying you back through time. As you march onward, you remember the sermons you heard before leaving home, how holy men in Scripture carried staves as signs of God's power. One mainstream fact. In the Bible, Moses wields a staff to part the Red Sea, and David, the shepherd boy, uses one to guard his flocks. In medieval imagination, the pilgrim staff wasn't just a crutch for weary legs. It was a link to those great figures of faith. Every time a pilgrim leaned on wood, it echoed those ancient stories. The symbolism grows clearer when you walk beside an older man whose staff is carved with small crosses all along its length. He explains between breaths that each notch reminds him of a psalm, a prayer he recites as his feet strike the dirt. To him, the staff isn't just a stick, it's scripture you can hold. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some regions, shepherds carved little faces or animals into their staves, half as decoration, half as company on lonely walks. Some pilgrims copied the custom, carrying staffs with carved heads, tiny companions who watched the road with them. You imagine one staff with a little wooden owl perched on top, staring judgmentally every time you trip. Historians still argue whether these carvings were considered holy art or just personal whimsy. Some sources claim clergy frowned upon frivolous decoration, while others suggest carved staffs were proudly carried even into shrines. The debate leaves you smiling, because either way, it proves that the staff was more than practical. It was personal. You notice the parallels all around you. Pilgrims lean on their staves like shepherds leaning on crooks, guiding themselves instead of sheep. Some even use them to nudge stragglers awake at dawn, a playful reminder of how the staff disciplines as well as supports. Light joke break. You think about how much power the staff holds in stories, and imagine Moses turning up at airport security today with his miracle-working stick. Let's just say that wouldn't fit in the overhead bin. As you continue, you realize something subtle. Carrying a staff changes how others see you. Villagers nod respectfully when you pass with your stick planted firmly in the ground. Children point and whisper, "Pilgrim," as though you're walking straight out of a stained glass window. By evening, when the road narrows between hedges, You lean harder on the staff and feel something unexpected: comfort. Not just in your legs, but in your spirit. The rhythm of the stick striking earth becomes a heartbeat of devotion. You settle that night beside the fire, staff across your knees, and think of Moses striking the rock, water springing forth. Maybe tomorrow, you joke inwardly, you'll try tapping your branch against a rock to see if wine comes out instead. But beneath the humor is truth. Your staff now carries a symbolic weight far heavier than its wood. It isn't just support, it's scripture made tangible, a shepherd's crook guiding a very different kind of flock. The next village brings you to a chapel where a line of pilgrims waits, each gripping a staff. You join them, unsure what the fuss is about, until you see the priest inside lifting one stave after another, murmuring prayers, sprinkling each with holy water. One by one, the sticks are transformed from ordinary branches into blessed companions. One mainstream fact: many medieval shrines and churches offered formal blessings for pilgrims' gear before departure. Priests would consecrate not just the traveler but also their staff, satchel, and cloak, turning them into sacred tools for the journey. Written rituals from the 11th century survive, describing prayers specifically for the staff that supports the weary. You shuffle forward nervously, clutching your makeshift branch. It still looks rough, bark flaking in your hand, but when the priest takes it, he doesn't laugh. He traces a cross in the air, whispers words too soft to catch, then sprinkles droplets of cold water across the wood. For the first time, you feel as if your staff has graduated from stick to something holy. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some regions, priests tied small pieces of blessed cord or cloth around the staff as part of the ritual. Pilgrims often left these on for the whole journey, like medieval friendship bracelets between traveler and stick. Others decorated theirs with palm fronds blessed on Palm Sunday, a reminder that the staff wasn't just practical, it was spiritual armor. Historians still argue whether these blessings were more symbolic than functional. Did the church intend the staff to be a true channel of divine power, or was the ritual mostly about giving pilgrims psychological confidence for the dangerous road? The debate lingers, but when you hold your newly blessed staff, the distinction hardly matters. You feel lighter, stronger, as if the wood itself has absorbed a spark of courage. Around the fire that night, conversation drifts to miraculous stories. One pilgrim swears his staff once stood upright without being touched, a sign of saintly approval. Another tells of a woman whose staff sprouted green leaves after being blessed, proof of God's favor. The tales sound wild, but after weeks on the road, you start to think anything is possible. Light joke break. You imagine dragging your staff into a modern coffee shop and asking the barista, "Can I get this thing blessed with a latte art cross on top?" Probably not the same effect. Still, you can't help stroking the wood as you drift toward sleep. For the first time, it feels less like a borrowed branch and more like a true companion. The blessing hasn't changed the shape, but it's changed the meaning. And in a world where the line between superstition and faith is paper thin, that's enough. When dawn arrives, you rise with renewed strength. Your staff clicks confidently against the road, no longer just support for tired legs, but a holy rhythm echoing with prayer. You march on, aware that your journey has shifted. With blessing behind you, you're no longer just a traveler, you're a pilgrim in full. At last the road dips toward the sea, and the salty air hits you like a revelation. For days you've trudged through forests, fields, and mud, but now the horizon widens into endless blue. Gulls wheel overhead, their cries mingling with the crash of waves. Pilgrims around you quicken their steps, for here lies the other great symbol of the journey, the shell. You walk down to the shoreline, where the tide has pulled back to reveal a scattering of scallop shells glistening in the wet sand. Their ridged fans catch the sunlight, each one like a miniature halo. You kneel and pick one up, feeling the rough grooves under your thumb. It's lighter than you expected, delicate yet firm, shaped as if designed for a pilgrim's palm. One mainstream fact: the scallop shell became the most recognizable emblem of pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, the shrine of St. James. Medieval pilgrims often collected shells from the Galician coast as proof they had reached the sacred destination. The ridges of the scallop, all converging to a single point, came to symbolize many paths leading to one holy goal. You turn the shell over, marveling at its natural elegance. It isn't carved by human hands, but it feels as deliberate as any icon. Around you, others are tying their shells to cloaks, hats, or satchels with pieces of cord. Some wear multiple, like medals after a long campaign. A few polish theirs in the sand, determined to make them shine like silver. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some pilgrims even used their shells as makeshift spoons. It wasn't unusual to see someone slurping soup from a scallop shell in a roadside inn. Others claimed the shell's grooves measured exactly the portion of food or drink that a pilgrim should humbly accept. Any more was gluttony. Imagine explaining to a modern waiter that you'll be eating dinner tonight with seashell cutlery. Historians still argue whether every shell was genuinely collected at the coast of Galicia or whether local merchants mass-produced them for pilgrims too tired or too broke to walk the extra miles. Archaeologists have found piles of discarded scallop shells far inland, suggesting that not all were authentically earned. But whatever the origin, once tied to your cloak, the shell carried the weight of meaning. As you loop a cord through the hole in your own shell, you feel transformed. Where the staff marks your body as a pilgrim, the shell marks your soul. Villagers who once saw you as a wanderer now nod in respect. Other pilgrims greet you with a knowing smile. The shell is a silent password, a badge that whispers, "I belong." That night, sitting by the waves, you hold your shell up to the firelight. Its ridges glow like golden rays, each line reminding you that your weary path isn't aimless. It's converging with countless others toward the same point. The idea comforts you as much as the warmth of the fire. Light joke break. You realize that medieval pilgrims basically invented the souvenir fridge magnet. Something small, cheap, and instantly recognizable that proves, yes, you were there. Except instead of sticking it on your fridge, you tie it to your cloak and hope it doesn't smell too fishy after a week. As sleep overtakes you, the sound of waves blends with your dreams. Tomorrow you'll carry both staff and shell together, symbols of earth and sea, strength and humility. For the first time, you feel fully equipped, body and spirit marked for the road ahead. The next stretch of the road feels different with the shell swinging from your cloak. Every time it bumps against your side, it makes a faint click, a reminder that you now wear proof of pilgrimage. And here's the curious thing. The shell isn't just decoration, it's evidence. People glance at it the way they'd glance at a stamped passport today, instantly reading your status. One mainstream fact. By the 12th century, the scallop shell was recognized across Europe as the mark of someone who had traveled to Santiago de Compostela. Even long after pilgrims returned home, the shell served as a trophy. Displaying one proved that you had actually made the arduous journey, giving you a kind of spiritual street cred. You notice how locals treat you differently now. At a roadside tavern, the innkeeper softens his tone when he sees your shell, offering bread at a fair price rather than trying to swindle you like he did a cloaked wanderer without one. To him, the shell says you're not a beggar, you're on God's business. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some pilgrims didn't stop with one shell. They sewed entire rows of them onto their cloaks, like medieval merit badges. A few even decorated their hats so extravagantly that they jingled with shells at every step, looking more like traveling chandeliers than humble seekers of grace. The more shells you carried, the louder your reputation walked before you. Historians still argue whether the shell was strictly a Compostela symbol, or if it was used more broadly by pilgrims across Europe. Some argue it was universally recognized as the generic pilgrim badge, while others insist it had a precise geographic link. Either way, when people saw it, they knew you weren't just wandering aimlessly. You were part of something sacred. At a communal fire that night, you listened to pilgrims boasting about their shells the way modern hikers brag about summit photos. One man holds up his, claiming the ridges on his are wider, proof that he walked farther than most. Another insists his was plucked directly from the shrine's fountain, though you suspect he bought it off a merchant 2 miles outside town. The point isn't accuracy, it's the status the shell confers. Light joke break. You realize pilgrims were basically walking around with the medieval version of airline loyalty cards. Some had bronze status, with one shell, others strutted like platinum members, with half a dozen dangling from their cloaks. You polish your own shell before bed, tracing the grooves with your thumb. It feels fragile, yes, but it also feels irreplaceable. You realize it's not just proof of where you've been, it's a reminder of where you're still going. The shell swings when you walk, taps your side when you falter, catches sunlight when you're weary. It's both companion and witness, silently testifying to the miles you've already survived. And as you drift off, you understand something simple but profound. In this world, people don't believe you're a pilgrim because of your words. They believe it because of what you carry, your staff, and now your shell. The morning sun rises, and the road ahead feels brighter, even if your legs argue otherwise. Your staff clicks on the stones, your shell swings from your cloak, and together they announce you as a pilgrim. But while these objects seem simple, their meanings deepen with every step. They're more than gear, they're social armor. One mainstream fact. In medieval Europe, to be recognized as a pilgrim was to access certain protections under canon law. Pilgrims were supposed to be offered food, lodging, and safe passage by the faithful. The staff and the shell made those rights visible. Without them, you might be dismissed as a wandering vagabond, or worse, a thief in disguise. You notice this firsthand at a village gate. Guards eye travelers suspiciously, but when they see your shell glinting in the light, their posture softens. One even gives you directions with a hint of reverence. For them, your symbols speak before you do, they announce. This traveler is walking for God. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some pilgrims leaned heavily into this holy branding. They painted crosses on their staffs, added tiny bells to their hats, or even carved prayers into their shoes so that each footprint left a mini-sermon in the mud. Imagine medieval Instagram influencers showing off not with filters, but with jingling accessories that screamed, #blessed. Historians still argue whether the protections pilgrims enjoyed were consistently honored, or if they existed more in theory than practice. Yes, laws declared pilgrims safe, but what did that mean in a lawless stretch of countryside or in times of war? Some accounts suggest pilgrims were robbed as frequently as anyone else, shell or no shell. Others describe noblemen going out of their way to host pilgrims precisely because the symbols demanded it. That evening, you sit at a long table in a monastery refectory. Bread, beans, and thin wine are served, nothing fancy, but it's more than enough. A monk places a hand on your staff, nodding approvingly, then taps the shell on your cloak as if confirming your credentials. Without those items, you doubt you would be here at all. Light joke break. You realize the shell and staff are basically your medieval verified badge. Without them, you're just some random traveler shouting into the void. With them, you've got the little blue check mark of holiness, and suddenly doors open. As you drift into sleep on a straw mat provided by the brothers, you marvel at the strange economy of symbols. A stick of wood and a seashell aren't worth much on their own, but together they unlock bread, beds, and blessings. They're the medieval equivalent of carrying both your passport and a credit card. Priceless when you're far from home. And so, while your muscles ache and your feet throb, you clutch your staff close, hear the faint rattle of your shell, and smile. For in this world, these objects aren't just tools. They are your identity, your safe passage, and your story, written on wood and shell. You wake before dawn, your back stiff from the monastery's straw mat, but grateful you had a roof at all. The air is damp and cool, carrying the faint smell of smoke from last night's fire. Your staff leans against the wall, waiting like an old friend, while your shell hangs heavy on your cloak. These two companions, humble as they look, are shaping the way the world sees you, and the way you see yourself. One mainstream fact. Pilgrims in the Middle Ages often carried a letter of recommendation or safe conduct issued by their local bishop, but few villagers along the road could read. That's where the visible symbols mattered more. The staff and shell worked as a universal language, instantly legible even to the illiterate. To wear them was to say, without words, I am walking under God's protection. By mid-morning, you pass a ragged man begging near a bridge. He extends a hand toward you, yet when he spots your shell, he quickly lowers his eyes and mumbles a blessing instead of asking for coins. You wonder, does he fear offending a holy traveler? Or is he simply hoping your journey earns enough favor that you'll whisper his name in your prayers? Quirky tidbit: some pilgrims actually monetize their shells. Returning home, they would sell spare shells to friends or neighbors who wanted the prestige of pilgrimage without the blisters. Imagine someone today buying a concert t-shirt off eBay and pretending they were in the front row all along. Fake it till you make it wasn't invented by social media. It had medieval roots. Historians still argue whether such resold shells undermine the spiritual integrity of the pilgrimage system, or if people viewed them as harmless tokens of faith, like carrying a relic without traveling. Some chroniclers scolded the practice, while others shrugged, noting that faith itself can be contagious even without the miles. That night, you gather with fellow travelers around a smoky fire. The conversation turns, as it often does, to tales of frauds and fakes, pilgrims who dress the part but never walk the walk. One man insists he saw a merchant in Paris wearing 10 shells, each from a different shrine, though the fellow had never left the city. Everyone laughs, but you feel a small shiver. How do you prove sincerity in a world where symbols can be bought? Light joke break. You realize medieval pilgrims faced the same problem as modern gamers. Anyone can buy the skin, but not everyone's put in the hours. Your staff and your blisters are the only true proof that you've leveled up honestly. As the stars scatter across the night sky, you run a hand over your staff's smooth wood, then trace the ridges of your shell. They are your receipts, your testimony, your only defense against the doubt of strangers. You close your eyes knowing that, while anyone might fake a pilgrim's look, only those who walk the long road carry its weight in their bones. The morning mist clings to your cloak as you shuffle onward, staff thudding against the dirt road like a metronome for your weary steps. Your shell taps softly when you move too quickly, reminding you with every sway that this journey is both public and personal. You are not simply a traveler. You are a story in motion, and the symbols you carry make sure everyone knows it. One mainstream fact: medieval societies were obsessed with visible markers of identity. Guild members wore badges, nobles displayed coats of arms, monks dressed in distinct habits. Pilgrims were no different. The staff and shell weren't optional accessories. They were a uniform, signaling your purpose to everyone you passed. Without them, you'd risk being mistaken for a runaway serf or a wandering beggar, which could be dangerous in lands where outsiders weren't always welcome. As you walk, you notice how villagers treat you differently from the wandering poor. A woman selling bread at a market stall spots your shell and lowers her price slightly, perhaps fearing divine retribution if she gouges a pilgrim. A child points to your staff and whispers to her father, who nods approvingly as though you've just passed a secret test. Symbols, you realize, carry power not because they're rare, but because everyone agrees they matter. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some pilgrims carved their names, prayers, or even crude doodles into their wooden staffs. These carvings worked like medieval graffiti, tiny messages left behind on a personal object that would someday be passed down, sold, or abandoned. Imagine stumbling upon an old pilgrim staff centuries later and finding a shaky sketch of a chicken or the words, "Pray for Margaret." It's the medieval version of "Kilroy was here." Historians still argue whether pilgrims were more revered as holy figures or quietly resented as freeloaders. After all, you consume food, take beds, and rely on charity, yet you contribute little material wealth in return. To some villagers, you might be a living blessing. To others, you're just another mouth to feed. The shell and staff smooth over these tensions by transforming you from stranger to pilgrim, a role that demands a measure of respect. By evening, you reach a roadside shrine where candles flicker in the dusk. A group of fellow pilgrims kneel together, their shells gleaming like scattered moons in the firelight. Your own shell feels heavier as you kneel too, as if gravity itself recognizes its role as a token of humility and hope. Light joke break. You can't help but think the medieval church basically invented the ultimate brand recognition strategy. Forget golden arches. Once you spot that scallop shell, you instantly know the franchise. Spiritual fast food for the soul, except the combo meal is blisters and beans. That night, stretched out beneath a thatched roof offered by a kindly farmer, you think about how fragile these symbols really are. A staff can snap, a shell can shatter, but their meaning is strangely indestructible. Even if your possessions were stolen, the image of them would cling to you like an invisible aura. They aren't just objects, they're declarations, woven into how others see you, how you pray, and even how you sleep. The world may never fully agree on whether pilgrims were saints or burdens, but as you close your eyes, you know this much. Without your staff and shell, you would be invisible. With them, you are part of something larger, a living thread in the great woven tapestry of belief. The road today winds through rolling fields, the kind where tall grass ripples like waves in a slow ocean. Your staff presses firm into the earth, each step grounding you as the horizon stretches endlessly ahead. The shell bounces against your cloak, its small clack almost lost in the whisper of the wind. You feel both exposed and defined by these objects. Without them, you'd be a nameless wanderer. With them, you're instantly recognizable. One mainstream fact: pilgrim symbols didn't just matter on the open road, they opened doors in the bustling cities too. Inns, monasteries, and hospitals often set aside special accommodations for pilgrims, but to qualify you had to look the part. The shell or the staff acted like an ID card, convincing hosts that you weren't a con artist or worse, a thief. In some places, even city toll collectors waived fees if they recognized the pilgrim's emblems. By mid-afternoon, you reach a busy market town. The smells hit first: roasting meat, damp wool, fish that's been sitting in the sun a little too long. As you edge through the crowd, your staff is not just a symbol. It's a shield keeping eager sellers and sticky-fingered pickpockets at bay. When someone jostles you, the shell swings into view, and suddenly the aggression fades. The sight of a pilgrim buys you a fraction of courtesy that a common traveler might not get. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some towns near pilgrimage routes made counterfeit shells to sell to locals or lazy nobles who wanted to collect holy souvenirs without sweating a mile. It was the medieval version of buying a fake Rolex on a street corner, glittering enough to impress, but hollow if you knew what to look for. Pilgrims who genuinely walked the road could spot fakes by the carving or material, though calling someone out was risky business. Historians still argue whether this widespread trade in fake shells harmed the credibility of pilgrimage or actually spread its popularity. Was it blasphemous fraud, or simply another way faith blended with commerce? Maybe both. After all, even counterfeits testify to the value of the real thing. If no one respected shells, no one would bother faking them. As night falls, you stop at a pilgrim hospice where weary travelers share a simple meal. The room hums with stories, boasts about distances covered, complaints about aching feet, whispers about miracles. The flicker of firelight catches dozens of shells pinned to cloaks, like stars caught in a small wooden sky. You're surrounded by people who, like you, chose to be marked by these signs. Light joke break. You realize this must be the only place in the Middle Ages where showing off your shell collection doesn't make you look like an eccentric beachcomber. Out here, the bigger your clinking seashell bling, the holier you seem. Somewhere, a future rapper might take notes. Later, lying awake on a straw pallet, you think about the duality of it all. The honesty of your aching muscles versus the possibility of others faking the same path. You grip your staff in the dark, running your thumb over the grooves your hand has worn into the wood. That simple wear and tear proves what a counterfeit never could. You've walked the miles, borne the weight, and earned the right to carry the shell that sways above your heart. Dawn creeps over the horizon, painting the sky with pale streaks of gold, and you set out again. Your feet are sore, but the steady rhythm of the staff against the packed earth lulls you into a sort of meditative trance. The shell taps softly with your stride, whispering its presence like a secret you share with the road itself. You're not just walking anymore. You're participating in a living ritual that ties you to countless others across centuries. One mainstream fact: pilgrimage routes became some of the safest highways of medieval Europe precisely because of their popularity. Authorities and church officials knew that streams of pilgrims would pass through, so they maintained paths, built bridges, and even erected protective shrines along the way. The symbols you carry mark you as part of that protected class. Bandits might still lurk in the woods, but robbing a pilgrim was seen as a particularly nasty sin, and not just because of church teaching. Communities knew harming pilgrims could bring divine punishment down on everyone nearby. Still, safety was relative. By midday, you encounter a group of men lounging near a crossroads. They eye your pouch, your boots, your staff. For a heartbeat, you tense, but then one notices your shell. Their demeanor shifts. One mutters a quick sign of the cross and waves you along. Your shell, fragile as it is, has just become a shield stronger than steel. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval pilgrims believed their staff could double as a magical object. There are records of staves being dipped in holy water, touched to relics, or rubbed against shrine walls to absorb protective power. Pilgrims then carried them like portable talismans, convinced the wood itself had become imbued with sacred energy. Whether or not it worked, it gave weary travelers confidence, and confidence can be its own kind of armor. Historians still argue whether these protective customs reflected deep theology or just folk superstition absorbed into the pilgrimage culture. Was a consecrated staff a genuine spiritual tool, or was it simply comfort for frightened travelers in dangerous lands? Either way, faith and fear often walked side by side on the road. By evening, you're at another village, greeted cautiously at first. A farmer squints, probably wondering if you're just another hungry drifter. But when he sees the shell dangling at your chest, his eyes soften. He offers you a crust of bread and a place near the fire. His children stare openly at the scallop, as if expecting it to glow or whisper secrets. You smile faintly, not correcting them. Sometimes symbols are more powerful when left unexplained. Light joke break. As you eat, you realize the pilgrim's shell is basically the medieval version of verified status. Forget the blue check on social media. You've got the white shell of authenticity. Except instead of bragging rights, it earns you dry bread and lukewarm soup. Not glamorous, but hey, at least nobody's scamming your DMs. That night, lying by the hearth, your staff resting close at hand, you marvel at how these simple objects keep reshaping your journey. A shell that looks like nothing more than a piece of the ocean, a stick anyone could cut from a tree. And yet they shield you, feed you, even clothe you in invisible respect. Symbols, it seems, don't just survive history, they make history possible. The road stretches longer today, winding through forest shadows where beams of sunlight flicker like golden arrows. Each step crunches on fallen leaves, and the sound of your staff tapping echoes faintly in the hush of trees. Birds scatter overhead, and you notice how alone you are. The shell at your chest feels like a small, silent companion, a reminder you're not just wandering aimlessly, but tracing a sacred route trodden by thousands before you. One mainstream fact: medieval pilgrims often joined together in groups for safety, but the shell and staff meant that even when walking alone, they were symbolically tied to the larger community of the faithful. Pilgrimage wasn't only an individual quest, it was a collective act, reinforced through shared insignia. A pilgrim from France and one from Italy could pass each other wordlessly on the road, and with one glance at the shell, they'd recognize kinship. At midday you pause at a stream, dunking your aching feet in the icy water. The staff lies across your lap, the shell glistens in the sunlight, and you catch your reflection rippling. Do you look holier? Probably not. You look dusty, tired, and in desperate need of a bath. But the objects transform perception. To others, you appear as a vessel of devotion, even if you secretly daydream about roasted chicken and soft mattresses. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some pilgrims carved little notches into their staffs to count the days walked, almost like a medieval Fitbit. Others etched prayers or crude drawings, creating a diary of sorts in wood. Some shells, too, were personalized, scratched with initials, symbols, or even crude faces. It turns out the urge to customize your spiritual gear isn't new. Medieval travelers were basically decorating their own holy merch. Historians still argue whether these personalized touches were acts of private devotion or just boredom relief on long roads. Did carving a cross into your staff deepen your piety? Or was it the 12th century version of doodling in the margins of your notebook? The line between sacred ritual and passing the time often blurs. Later, you emerge from the woods into open fields where other pilgrims dot the horizon. You catch up to a group chanting hymns, their shells clinking like chimes in the breeze. They wave you over, and soon your staff joins theirs in rhythm. The collective sound is almost hypnotic, a chorus of wood striking earth, a reminder that even strangers can walk in sync when united by purpose. Light joke break. As you march along, you realize the staff also doubles as the perfect mosquito swatter. You're not sure if that counts as a holy use, but if the saints could see the size of these bugs, they'd probably grant you an exemption. By nightfall, you settle among the group in a field near a chapel. Dozens of shells hang from cloaks, gleaming like moonlit stars, while staves lean against stones in a haphazard forest of wood. The objects may be simple, but together they weave a powerful spectacle. It feels like you've stepped into a living tapestry, symbols binding strangers into a family, the shell and staff whispering the same message. You belong. You wake to the sound of bells drifting through the dawn mist. Somewhere ahead lies a small church, its spire poking out of the fog like a finger pointing heavenward. Your body groans in protest as you rise, but your hand instinctively reaches for the staff. Without it, you'd wobble like a newborn foal. You sling the shell back over your chest, its edges cool against your skin, and rejoin the flow of pilgrims heading toward the bells. One mainstream fact: parish churches along pilgrimage routes often rang their bells at sunrise not just for locals, but also to guide travelers. The sound carried across fields and forests, helping pilgrims orient themselves towards safety, food, and prayer. Your shell and staff mark you as someone welcome there. Not a beggar, not a bandit, but a traveler on God's business. When you arrive, villagers greet the crowd of pilgrims with bread and watered wine. It's not a feast, but it's enough to quiet your stomach. The priest notices your scallop shell and nods, then takes your staff and blesses it with a swift sprinkle of holy water. That simple gesture transforms it again in your mind. No longer just a walking stick, but a staff of protection, maybe even a little miracle maker if you believe hard enough. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some regions, pilgrims would scrape tiny chips from church doorways or altar stones and carry them home inside their shells. Supposedly, the shell acted like a container of holiness, a portable reliquary. Of course, this led to churches being slowly whittled down by generations of eager pilgrims, a medieval version of souvenir culture. If anyone asks, though, you didn't pocket that pebble in your pouch. Historians still argue whether these fragments were genuinely believed to carry sacred power, or if they were more like personal keepsakes. Did pilgrims see them as relics or just reminders, like buying a postcard of Notre Dame before the invention of postcards? The debate continues, just like your road. By midday, you're walking again, sun hot on your back, shell bouncing lightly against your tunic. A young boy from the village runs after you, pointing at the scallop. He can't stop giggling, probably because from his perspective, it looks like you're wearing a seashell bra. You laugh too, because honestly, he's not wrong. Fashion statement or holy badge? Maybe both. Light joke break. As you swing your staff, you realize it's also the perfect instrument for poking fellow pilgrims awake when they start snoring too loudly at camp. Who needs divine judgment when you've got the tap-tap justice of Oakwood? By nightfall, you're resting under a tree, watching stars blink into being. The staff is your pillow, the shell your badge of purpose. You think about all the bells you've followed, the crumbs you've collected, the strangers who became temporary family. Each step teaches you the same quiet truth. The objects don't just carry you forward. You carry them forward too, adding your story to theirs, carving your mark into a tradition far older than you. The next stretch of road snakes through hills, the kind that promise endless views but punish your legs. Each climb makes your calves burn, and you lean harder on the staff. Without it, you'd be on your knees. At the crest of one hill, the wind snatches your cloak and rattles the shell against your chest like a drumbeat. For a moment, you feel like the landscape itself is cheering you on. One mainstream fact: medieval pilgrimage routes weren't just dusty plains. They crossed mountains, forests, and treacherous rivers. The Camino de Santiago, for instance, demanded grueling climbs over the Pyrenees. Many pilgrims described these mountain passes as both spiritual tests and physical nightmares. The shell and staff served as constant reminders of why the pain was worth enduring. You stop at a wayside shrine tucked into a hollow. A small wooden figure of St. James leans forward, almost as though he's tired of holding up his own carved staff. Pilgrims before you have left tokens: dried flowers, a ribbon, a cracked shell. You add your own: a smooth stone picked up from the hilltop, set carefully at the saint's feet. The shell on your chest and the staff in your hand suddenly feel lighter, as if they've absorbed a fraction of your burden. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some accounts, pilgrims in mountain regions use their shells as impromptu snow scoops. It sounds ridiculous, but picture it. You're freezing, and the scallop works like a little shovel for melting snow into drinking water. Not exactly the use the church intended, but practicality tends to win when survival's on the line. Historians still argue whether these roadside shrines were built primarily for pilgrims or for locals who wanted protection over their fields and paths. Were you stopping at a holy landmark meant for you, or were you intruding on someone else's spiritual boundary marker? The dual purpose blurs, reminding you that your journey isn't just about you. It runs through lives already lived here. The descent from the hill is trickier than the climb. Loose stones skitter underfoot, and the staff becomes a lifeline, wedged into dirt to keep you from tumbling. The shell bangs against your ribs, steady and reassuring, as if whispering, "Don't worry, gravity hasn't claimed you yet." By the time you reach the valley floor, your legs feel like jelly, but you're still standing. Light joke break. At one point, you try using the staff as a pretend ski pole, sliding down a patch of loose gravel. You end up on your backside. Somewhere, St. James probably sighed. Pilgrim dignity, 0. Pilgrim comedy, 1. That night, you camp near a stream, exhaustion wrapped around you like a blanket. Other pilgrims gather close, shells gleaming in firelight. Together, you plant your staffs upright in the soil, their silhouettes rising like a little forest. The shells and sticks aren't just tools anymore. They're beacons of survival, proof you conquered the hills and lived to laugh about it. Tomorrow, new roads await. Morning mist curls low across the fields, and your breath hangs in little clouds. The path ahead looks endless, a ribbon of mud and stone, but your staff taps out a steady rhythm. Left foot, right foot, tap, repeat. The shell swings lightly, and you can't help but imagine it as a medal you never earned, but somehow inherited. One mainstream fact: many pilgrimage roads weren't just walked, they were sung. Chants, psalms, and folk songs helped weary travelers keep pace. Pilgrims often carried staffs like conductors' batons, tapping or striking to keep time. Some manuscripts even preserve simple melodies said to have been sung along the Camino. Your staff, whether you mean it to or not, joins that tradition with every knock on stone. As you walk, you catch up to a small group. 2 women, 1 man, and a boy who can't stop staring at your shell. He asks if he can touch it, and when you let him, his eyes widen as if it's glowing. The women laugh, explaining that in their village, children were told scallop shells could make wishes come true. Whether that's true or just medieval parental bribery, you don't ask. You just enjoy the sparkle of belief in the boy's eyes. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some pilgrims actually decorated their staffs with tiny bells. Each step would jingle faintly, both to announce their holy purpose and, let's be honest, to keep wolves at bay. Imagine trudging through a silent forest with a staff that sounds like a distant ice cream truck. Functional, yes. Subtle? Absolutely not. Historians still argue whether the shells were originally exclusive to Compostela pilgrims, or if they spread earlier as generic symbols of holy travel. Did every pilgrim's shell connect directly to St. James, or did the idea snowball until any scallop was fair game? The debate lingers, just as you linger on this road, not fully knowing whether your shell marks you as part of one path or all paths. Midday sun pounds overhead, so you use the shell again as a cup, dipping it into a trickle of water by the roadside. The taste is faintly metallic, but in that moment, it feels like the sweetest drink you've ever had. Your staff serves as a tripod while you squat awkwardly to fill the shell, because nothing says holy journey like nearly falling headfirst into a ditch while trying to hydrate. Light joke break. At one point, you find yourself drumming your staff against a tree just to amuse yourself, and a passing crow squawks back like it's offended at your lack of rhythm. Congratulations, you've just been heckled by wildlife. That evening, you and your fellow travelers collapse near an abandoned mill. You lean the staff against the wall and place the shell on a stone as though they're your silent companions. The boy from earlier sneaks over and whispers another wish into the curve of your shell. You don't tell him this, but you make one too. Whether they come true or not doesn't matter, because by tomorrow, you'll both be walking again, bound by the same rhythm of steps and the same stubborn hope. The road straightens for a while, and you almost enjoy the illusion that progress comes easy. Each step pushes dust into the air, coating your boots and making the shell tap dryly against your chest. The staff digs a little deeper into the path, its tip already chipped from so many miles. You realize you're leaving faint scars in the earth itself, tiny marks that, like the shell, say, "A pilgrim was here." One mainstream fact: medieval roads were more than dirt, they were arteries of exchange. Pilgrims walking with shells and staffs weren't just spiritual wanderers. They carried stories, news, and sometimes even commerce between towns. Some abbeys kept records noting when waves of pilgrims passed through, like a medieval version of tracking tourist season. Your shell links you to that moving tide of humanity, and your staff is the walking stick that physically carried that news across Europe. On this stretch, you hear footsteps behind you, and soon find yourself alongside a ragged-looking man wearing a red cross on his cloak. He tells you he's been to Jerusalem and back, and he laughs at your little scallop shell. "Try sand in your shoes," he says. "That's the real badge." He claims he once used his staff to chase off desert thieves. True. Exaggeration? Hard to say, but his grin suggests that pilgrims always compete in the unofficial sport of "my suffering beats your suffering." Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval guides actually warned pilgrims to carry staffs not only for defense, but also to poke suspicious food at inns. Think of it as the original fork test. If the bread bends your staff, maybe don't eat it. Your own stick suddenly feels like the Swiss Army knife of the 13th century. Historians still argue whether tales of pilgrimage dangers, bandits, wolves, kidnappers, were exaggerated by chroniclers to dramatize the journey. Were pilgrims really in constant peril, or did writers embellish to make successful returns seem more miraculous? The staff in your hand is either an emergency weapon or, perhaps more often, just a comfort prop for anxious imaginations. You and the Jerusalem pilgrim share bread and dried fish that night. He asks to hold your shell, and though he teases it, he presses it to his forehead for a moment, as if privately acknowledging its weight. You in turn test the heft of his scarred staff. It feels heavier, denser, as though it's absorbed stories you can't quite hear. You return it with a nod, realizing that no matter how different the tokens, every pilgrim clings to something that says, "I belong to this path." Light joke break. Later, while settling by the fire, the man tells you he once used his staff to swat a mosquito in Italy, and broke the staff. "Mosquito won that battle," he chuckles. You picture a medieval insect with a tiny crusader flag, and laugh harder than you should at bedtime. When you wake the next morning, the man is already gone, his red cross fading on the horizon. You grip your shell and staff tighter, feeling both humbled and stubbornly proud. Your journey may not stretch to Jerusalem, but your marks on the road, dusty footprints, shell water scoops, staff scratches, are every bit as real. Your footsteps crunch over loose gravel, and you notice how your staff makes a different sound on each surface. Hollow on wooden planks, sharp on cobblestones, muffled in grass. The shell, too, keeps catching little bits of road dust, its grooves filling like the pages of a book. Together, they become instruments recording your journey. Not just tools, but a soundtrack and a diary etched in wood and calcium. One mainstream fact: the famous Liber Sancti Jacobi, a 12th century guidebook to Santiago, mentions both staffs and shells, describing them as the recognizable marks of pilgrims on the road. They weren't just optional accessories, they were visual shorthand for "don't rob me, I'm poor and holy, and yes, I deserve that free scoop of soup at the monastery kitchen." Even in a time without passports, these two objects served as instant ID cards. That afternoon, a merchant cart rattles by, and you overhear him mutter about fake pilgrims. Some desperate peasants apparently wore shells they'd never earned, hoping to beg more successfully in towns. Your staff suddenly feels like proof against such accusations. After all, no faker would willingly drag this much splintered wood across miles of mud. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some coastal areas had entire cottage industries selling scallop shells drilled and strung on cords. Historians think a good number of authentic souvenirs may have been harvested not in Compostela, but in local bays hundreds of miles away. Imagine buying your holy badge only to discover later it's basically the medieval knockoff version. You wonder briefly whether your shell's ridges really trace back to Spanish shores, or if some cheeky fisherman in Brittany is laughing in his grave. Historians still argue whether pilgrims cared about authenticity at all. Was the shell powerful because it literally came from Compostela's coast, or was its meaning symbolic no matter where it was found? The debate mirrors your own inner dialogue. Does the staff's strength lie in oak fibers, or in your belief that it steadies you? By evening, you share a fire with a group of minstrels heading the same way. They ask if they can borrow your staff as a drumstick for their lute rhythm, and soon the clearing fills with laughter and song. You hold your shell up like a conductor's baton, leading a ridiculous chorus of tired voices. No one sings in tune, but no one cares. For a moment, staff and shell transform into musical props, turning hardship into comedy. Light joke break. At one point, a dog joins in, howling miserably off-key. One of the minstrels insists that means the dog has been divinely called to pilgrimage. Another insists it just wants your bread. Either way, the mutt follows you the next morning, tail wagging like it owns the shell's blessings too. As you continue on, the shell taps gently against your chest, and the staff guides your weight forward. They've stopped feeling like objects you carry and started feeling like parts of your own body. An extra limb in your hand, a curved heart pressed against your chest. And slowly, you realize, these humble items may not make the miles shorter, but they make the miles yours. The sun is low in the sky, casting long shadows that stretch like sleepy fingers across the road. Your staff drags lazily over stones and roots. Your shell clinks softly against your chest, and you feel the slow satisfaction of progress. Every step has been earned, every mile stitched into your body and mind. By now, you're no longer just a person walking. You're a pilgrim in the truest sense, defined as much by symbols as by sweat. One mainstream fact: medieval pilgrims often marked their routes with small tokens, including shells and carvings on their staffs, leaving a trail of visual breadcrumbs for those who followed. In some regions, entire shrines were built because a pilgrim had left a shell or staff behind, turning personal devotion into permanent landmarks. Your own objects, modest as they are, place you in this continuum of travelers who shape the landscape both spiritually and physically. At mid-afternoon, you cross a bridge spanning a fast-moving river. Beneath the wooden planks, the current rushes and churns, mirroring the swirl of exhaustion, hope, and wonder inside you. A fellow traveler tips his staff against yours in greeting, then notices the shell swinging at your chest. His face lights up, a quick nod of mutual recognition passing between you. Even in this crowd of strangers, symbols create instant fellowship. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some pilgrims carried tiny pouches of holy water, dipping their shells into it and then sprinkling their staffs, convinced it would bless every step and ward off evil spirits. Others simply used shells as miniature cups to sip water while avoiding contact with dirty rivers. Functional, devotional, and sometimes ceremonial all at once. Historians still argue whether such practices were deeply theological or primarily folk traditions. Were shells and staffs endowed with real sacred significance, or were they practical tools dressed up with ritual? Probably a bit of both, which, in a way, mirrors your own tangled thoughts as the miles stretch out. By evening, you approach a village perched on a hillside. Children race out to see you, curious about the clinking shell and the sturdy staff. An old woman waves, calling blessings from her doorway. You feel the odd pride of recognition. These objects you've carried so long are more than items. They're your passport to kindness, the silent language of respect on which the road depends. Light joke break. One child pretends your shell is a hat and laughs uproariously when you bow as if you've accepted a crown. Pilgrim dignity may have slipped yet again, but you can't stop laughing either. Sometimes, humility tastes like shared amusement under the evening sun. You settle for the night in a small inn, staff leaning against the wall, shell tucked inside your cloak. The fire warms your shoulders, and you close your eyes knowing that while the road is far from over, you are never truly alone as long as your symbols remain. The staff and shell have carried you this far. They will carry you farther, into new villages, new conversations, and new horizons. You wake to a sky streaked with pink and violet, the chill of dawn sharpening every sound. Your staff feels familiar in your grip, worn smooth where your hand rests, and the shell bounces gently against your chest as if encouraging you forward. Each step is a meditation. The tap of wood on stone, the soft clink of the scallop, the distant crow of a rooster. You are alive, present, and marked by tradition. One mainstream fact. Many pilgrims recited prayers or psalms aloud as they walked, using the rhythm of their staff and the presence of the shell to structure their devotion. The physical movement of walking, combined with vocal prayer, created a meditative loop, mind and body in sync. Scholars believe this repetitive action helped pilgrims endure the often grueling miles while maintaining a spiritual focus. By mid-morning, you pass through a meadow where wildflowers nod in the breeze. The shell catches the sunlight, shimmering almost like a signal. Nearby, a farmer pauses his work to make the sign of the cross. Even if he has no idea who you are, the symbols you bear communicate your purpose instantly. You can feel the subtle comfort of acknowledgement. The world has carved out a small space for you to belong. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some accounts, pilgrims would attach tiny feathers or trinkets to their staffs to personalize them. These additions sometimes represented a prayer, a loved one left behind, or a humorous talisman meant to amuse fellow travelers. Imagine a medieval version of decorating your hiking pole with stickers or keychains, a little whimsy tucked into an otherwise austere journey. Historians still argue whether these personalizations diminished the staff's sacred authority or enhanced the pilgrim's spiritual expression. Was adding a feather a harmless flourish, or did it risk trivializing the sanctity of the object? The line, like the road, is winding and hard to define. By afternoon, you cross a shallow river. You balance on stones, staff steady in your hand, shell clinking. A sudden slip sends you wobbling, but the staff saves you. The incident reminds you that these symbols are not merely spiritual, they are practical. They anchor you to reality, even as they connect you to centuries of tradition. Light joke break. You consider naming your staff and shell. Maybe Sir Tapalot for the stick and Clinky McClackface for the shell. You laugh at your own absurdity, realizing that humor is as essential to the pilgrimage as prayer and endurance. As dusk approaches, you find a quiet glade to rest. The staff leans nearby, the shell cradled in your lap. The air is filled with the subtle hum of evening insects, the wind weaving through leaves. You feel small, yet part of a vast, invisible network of pilgrims who have walked these roads before and will walk them after. The shell and staff are more than objects. They are extensions of your will, your faith, and your story, quietly marking each step as sacred and significant. The horizon glows with early morning amber as you rise, shoulders stiff but resolve firm. Your staff rests like a loyal sentinel in your hand, and the shell swings lightly, its subtle tap in rhythm with your steps. The road ahead promises another day of rhythm, endurance, and the strange mix of comfort and strain that has become familiar. Each mile is a meditation in motion. One mainstream fact: pilgrimage routes were dotted with markers and signs, some carved into stones, others painted on trees, to guide travelers. Pilgrims carrying shells and staffs could navigate more confidently, recognizing these markers as part of a shared system of knowledge. Your shell isn't just a symbol of devotion, it's an anchor that tells the world, I belong here, and I know the path. By late morning, you reach a small village where the market is just waking. The smell of bread baking drifts through the streets, mingling with livestock and the tang of morning dew. Villagers glance at your shell and nod politely, some stepping aside to let you pass. You realize the objects you carry act as social lubricants. They smooth interactions, grant access, and communicate respect without a single word. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some pilgrimage accounts, travelers decorated their shells with paint or etched tiny symbols representing milestones along the route. A simple shell could evolve into a visual diary, recording where you'd been and what you'd endured. It's like carrying a scrapbook on your chest, clinking softly with every step. Historians still argue whether these personalizations were acts of piety or expressions of vanity. Did adorning your shell enhance your spiritual journey, or did it subtly shift focus from devotion to display? The ambiguity persists, just as the miles stretch endlessly before you. By afternoon, you cross a bridge over a rushing stream, the water glinting in sunlight. Your staff braces against the edge, keeping you steady as you test each stone. The shell bounces, reminding you to slow your pace. Here, practical and spiritual intertwine. Your tools protect you physically and signify your sacred purpose. Light joke break. As you step carefully across, you joke to yourself that the staff is a medieval GPS, only slightly less accurate. Recalculating, next holy miracle in 200 meters, you murmur, imagining St. James rolling his eyes from some celestial vantage point. That evening, you camp near an abandoned chapel, leaning your staff against the crumbling stone wall. The shell rests beside you, catching the last slant of daylight. You listen to the wind threading through the ruins, the distant hoot of an owl, and the faint rustle of leaves. These objects, simple yet profound, have guided your journey, connected you to strangers and saints alike, and reminded you with every clink and tap that every step is both ordinary and sacred. Morning breaks with a soft, diffused light, and the road ahead is lined with low hills and fields of swaying grass. Your staff presses rhythmically into the soil, each tap grounding you, each step measured and deliberate. The shell bounces against your chest, a small percussion accompaniment to your solitary march. You feel the strange duality of fatigue and purpose, the way long journeys etch themselves into muscle and mind alike. One mainstream fact: pilgrims often relied on physical markers, staffs, shells, and sometimes painted symbols to maintain identity and direction over long distances. Towns, monasteries, and inns recognized these markers instantly, granting hospitality or space in crowded refectories. Your shell, though tiny, is a potent credential. The staff, more than just support, signals intention and commitment. By late morning, you encounter a small group of local children who rush forward, curious about your shell. One of them tries to hang it around her own neck. You laugh softly, explaining it's earned on the road, not given lightly. The playful interaction reminds you that symbols carry meaning, and that meaning is learned and respected, even if it begins as curiosity or wonder. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some pilgrimage traditions, shells were believed to capture the traveler's prayers. Pilgrims would whisper hopes into the shell or touch it to their forehead, convinced that their intentions would ride the grooves all the way to Santiago. Some even thought shells could hum faintly at night if prayers were sincere. Whether true or not, the ritual adds weight to the object far beyond its material value. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or localized. Did every pilgrim whisper into their shell, or were these fringe customs blown into legend by later chroniclers? Regardless, the idea underscores the intersection of faith and physical symbol, illustrating how the shell became a repository not just of identity, but of devotion. By afternoon, you descend a gentle slope into a valley where smoke curls from chimneys, the smell of baked bread and roasting meat filling the air. The shell clinks softly with each step, reminding you of the countless others who walked here before you, leaving the same tiny sounds behind. Your staff steadies you as you navigate uneven ground, the two working in tandem as guides, supports, and reminders of purpose. Light joke break. You imagine the shell whispering gossip about all the other pilgrims it's carried. Did you see that guy yesterday? Tripped over his own staff. You laugh quietly at the absurdity, the imagined personality of your tools offering companionship on an otherwise silent stretch of road. As the day wanes, you settle near a small chapel, staff leaning against a wall and shell tucked into your cloak. The wind stirs through the valley, birds call across the fields, and the sun lowers in a soft golden haze. These simple objects, once mere tools, have become extensions of your journey, carriers of stories, shields of respect, and talismans of endurance. In the quiet twilight, they pulse with a significance that only the road can bestow. The morning is gentle, dew glistening on the grass as you lift your staff once more and set the shell carefully against your chest. The air carries the faint scent of wildflowers, of damp earth, and of the distant town you aim to reach. Each step feels lighter somehow, as if the journey has molded your body and your mind into a single flowing rhythm. You are weary, yes, but there is a deep, quiet satisfaction in the ache, in the cadence of staff and shell. One mainstream fact. Arriving at Santiago de Compostela, the ultimate destination for many pilgrims, brought immense relief and spiritual reward. Pilgrims would present their shells, which had traveled with them from the start, as proof of completion. Churches often displayed these shells, transforming humble seaside artifacts into emblems of triumph and devotion. The shell you carry is more than ornament. It is your story, a vessel of accomplishment and faith. As you approach the city gates, merchants and townsfolk observe the procession of weary travelers. Some wave, others nod, recognizing the scallop shells swinging in unison. Your staff has guided you through hills, rivers, and forests, becoming an extension of your will. Without it, some sections of the road would have been impossible. With it, each step feels deliberate and assured. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some pilgrims would leave their staffs and shells at the cathedral, almost like surrendering the physical burdens they had carried for so long. Certain legends even claim that shells could be traded for small blessings or charms from the clergy. This ritual highlights the fluidity between material objects and spiritual reward, a tangible acknowledgement of intangible devotion. Historians still argue whether these rituals were standardized or varied widely depending on local custom. Did the shell function primarily as proof, as a relic, or as a personal token of reflection? The answer is probably all three, depending on the pilgrim's intention and the town's tradition. By afternoon, you stand within the cathedral, all washing over you. Sunlight streams through stained glass, illuminating mosaics and relics. Your staff leans quietly at your side, and the shell rests near your heart. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight of centuries of pilgrims and prayers, of trials endured and paths forged. Light joke break. You lean on your staff and whisper to the shell, "Well, we finally made it, partner. Think they'll let us sit in the front pew." It's a small, private joke, but the absurdity makes the long journey feel lighter. Now slow the pace. Sit quietly in your mind. The chants echo faintly, footsteps fade, and the bustling cathedral becomes a soft hum. You feel the warmth of accomplishment, the resonance of history around you, and the gentle weight of the staff and shell that have carried you here. They were never just tools. They were companions, guides, and witnesses to every moment of your journey. The road ends, but the memory of it lingers, soft and enduring. Now, as the light fades to amber and the distant echoes of Pilgrims' voices dim, let your body sink into the comfort of your bed. Feel the gentle curve of your spine relaxing, the tension in your shoulders softening. Imagine the faint tap of a staff on the cobblestones slowing to a hush, the soft clink of the shell resting against a chest finally still. Each footstep you've taken, each mile endured, lingers in memory like footprints on a sun-warmed path, fading yet indelible. Inhale slowly, letting the scent of damp earth, forest, and distant incense drift through your mind. Exhale, releasing the fatigue and tension that has followed you like shadows. Picture the staff and shell leaning quietly nearby, guardians of your journey, now silent but ever present. The rhythmic rhythm of the road softens into a lullaby, a gentle hum that carries you further into calm. Every trial, every laugh, every step, each has been a stitch in the tapestry of this night's story, a whisper of history folding around you. Let the warmth of accomplishment, the resonance of centuries, and the quiet satisfaction of the road cradle you. Drift, unhurried, toward the gentle horizon of dreams, where the echoes of your pilgrimage become a soft, reassuring pulse. You are safe. You are complete. You are part of something timeless, carried forward by memory, by story, and by the quiet, enduring presence of your shell and staff. Let your thoughts ease, your breathing slow, and sink into the gentle hush that follows the long, winding path you've walked tonight.